When the same sign appears once, you can call it random. But when it finds you twice, in two different places, under two different circumstances, the deeper question is no longer whether the universe is being strange. The deeper question is why your unconscious needed you to see it again. Not everything meaningful arrives loudly. Sometimes it comes as a small object on a sidewalk, a repeated number on a clock, the same sentence spoken by two different people different, a song you hear in the exact moment you are trying not to feel something, or a dream that returns with the patience of a visitor who knows you are finally ready to open the door. And when that happens, the ordinary world begins to feel slightly charged, as if something beneath the surface of your life is trying to speak through the surface itself. This is not about superstition. It is not about chasing every coincidence until your mind becomes tired from searching for messages everywhere. In the language of Carl Jung, a sign becomes powerful when the outer event touches something already moving in the inner world. The unconscious does not usually speak in clear sentences. It does not sit you down and explain the truth in a calm email with perfect grammar and a list of next steps. It speaks through images, symbols, dreams, attractions, aversions, repeated patterns, and strange moments that refuse to leave your memory. The conscious mind may say, "That was nothing." But the deeper psyche may say, "Look again. Something here belongs to you." Perhaps you have experienced this before. You see a symbol once, and it unsettles you, but you move on. Then a few days later, it appears again, and this time your body responds before your logic can explain it. Your chest tightens slightly. Your attention sharpens. You feel a quiet pause inside, as if a hidden part of you has been called by name. It is not that the sign controls your future. It is not that the sign gives you permission to abandon your life, make a dramatic decision, or turn away from ordinary responsibility. It may be something more intimate than that. It may be the unconscious using the visible world to guide your attention toward an invisible truth. The sign is not the answer. The sign is the knock. The answer begins when you ask what part of you was awakened by it. What longing did it touch? What wound did it disturb? What forgotten dream did it place back in your hands? What door did it make you remember? This is why the second appearance matters. The first time, the ego can dismiss it. The second time, something in you hesitates. And in that hesitation, a deeper intelligence begins to enter. The same sign does not return to entertain you. It returns because something inside you has been waiting to be seen. The unconscious rarely speaks in a way that satisfies the part of you that wants certainty. It does not usually give you a clean instruction, a signed letter from heaven, or a perfect explanation you can show to someone else and say, "Here, this is proof." It speaks more like a dream speaks, through atmosphere, repetition, image, symbol, and feeling. A door you keep noticing. A name that returns. A phrase that follows you through the day. A number that appears during a season when you are already questioning your life. A place that suddenly feels charged with memory. A small object that would mean nothing to anyone else, yet somehow pulls your attention as if it knows where you have been hiding from yourself. This is why Jung took symbols seriously. Not because every symbol predicts an event, but because symbols can carry truths the conscious mind is not ready to say directly. Your conscious mind prefers order. It wants reasons, timelines, practical explanations, and visible evidence. It says, "This happened because of chance. That person said those words because people say things like that. That song played because playlists repeat. That dream came because the brain was tired." And sometimes, yes, that is true. But sometimes the meaning does not come from the event alone. It comes from the relationship between the event and the inner state of the person who receives it. A key is only a key until you are living with the feeling that something in you has been locked away. A bridge is only a bridge until you are standing between the life you built and the life that is quietly calling you. A repeated song is only a song until it carries the exact emotion you have refused to name. A stranger's sentence is only a sentence until it touches the private question you have been avoiding for months. This is the difference between superstition and depth. Superstition says the outer sign controls you. Depth says the outer sign reveals something that was already alive within you. The unconscious does not need to control the world in order to speak through it. It only needs one image to meet one hidden truth at the right time. And when that happens, the moment becomes meaningful. You do not have to force meaning onto every detail. You do not have to become anxious, searching every street sign, every license plate, every passing conversation for secret messages. That would only turn the sacred into pressure. The real question is quieter. Which signs do not leave you alone? Which image returns with emotional weight? Which repeated thing makes you pause, not because it is dramatic, but because it feels strangely personal? The unconscious often chooses ordinary things because ordinary things can pass through the defenses of the ego. If the truth came too directly, you might reject it. If it arrived too loudly, you might fear it. So it comes gently, disguised as something simple, waiting for your attention to become honest enough to hear what the symbol is carrying. Claire Bennett did not consider herself the kind of person who looked for signs. At 34, she lived in Seattle, worked as a user experience researcher for a technology company near South Lake Union, and trusted evidence more than intuition. Her days were built around interviews, data patterns, product meetings, and careful questions designed to understand why people did what they did. She knew how to observe behavior without becoming sentimental about it. She knew how to listen, categorize, summarize, and present findings in clean slides that made uncertain human feelings look organized enough for a conference room. From the outside, Claire seemed steady and intelligent, the kind of woman who had made reasonable choices and built a life that made sense. But beneath that practical life, there was a quiet restlessness she had not been able to explain. It usually appeared in the morning, as she looked out the window of her apartment while the city was still gray with rain, or in the evening when she closed her laptop and felt as if some unnamed part of the day had never belonged to her. She was not unhappy in a dramatic way. That was what made it harder to understand. Nothing was falling apart. She had a stable income, a good apartment, reliable friends, and a career her family respected. Yet for several months, she had carried the faint feeling that there was a door somewhere inside her that she had walked past too many times. One Saturday morning, after a long week of meetings, Claire took the light rail downtown and walked toward Pike Place Market. The sky was low and silver. Rain moved softly over the streets, not heavy enough for an umbrella, just enough to darken the brick sidewalks and make the neon signs glow more deeply. Vendors were arranging flowers in bright buckets. Tourists moved slowly with coffee cups in their hands. Somewhere nearby, a street musician played a soft melody that seemed to disappear into the sound of the city. Claire was walking past a stone ledge near the market when something small caught the light near her shoe. She looked down and saw a silver key lying close to the curb. It was old-fashioned, thinner than a house key, with a rounded top and a slightly worn edge, as if it had belonged to a drawer, a small box, or a door from another time. She picked it up without thinking. It felt cold in her palm. For a few seconds, the noise of the market seemed to move farther away. There was nothing extraordinary about the object itself, and yet her attention gathered around it with unusual intensity. She could not explain why a lost key made her feel so still. A rational part of her immediately stepped in and said, "Someone dropped this, that is all." So she placed it carefully on the stone ledge where the owner might see it, then continued walking. But the image stayed with her all day. It returned while she ordered coffee, while she watched rain gather on the window, while she rode home past buildings washed in gray light. The key had not spoken. It had not told her what to do. It had simply touched a place in her that already knew something was locked. A few days later, Claire drove south to Tacoma to visit her mother. The sky had cleared for the first time in nearly a week, and sunlight moved across the windshield in pale bands as she followed Interstate 5 past warehouses, evergreens, and stretches of traffic that slowed without reason. She told herself she had forgotten about the key at Pike Place Market, but that was not fully true. The image still returned at quiet moments, especially when she was tired enough for her practical mind to loosen its grip. Her mother had asked for help sorting through old boxes in the garage, the kind of weekend task that begins as cleaning and somehow becomes a conversation with every version of the family that once lived there. The garage smelled faintly of cardboard, cedar, and dust. There were holiday decorations, old photo albums, a box of school papers, and plastic bins labeled in her mother's careful handwriting. Claire worked through them patiently, separating what could be donated from what should be kept, until she reached a worn blue storage box pushed against the back wall. Inside were folders from her senior year of high school, a few faded programs from school events, and a large envelope with her name written across the front. She opened it casually, expecting old report cards or college brochures. Instead, the first thing that slid into her hand was a small silver key. Claire stopped moving. It was not exactly the same as the one she had found in Seattle, but it was close enough that her body recognized it before her thoughts could explain it away. Thin metal, rounded top, slightly worn edge, cold weight in her palm. For a moment, the garage grew strangely quiet, as if the air had thickened around her. Beneath the key were photographs from when she was 17, standing in front of a school art display with paint on her fingers and a shy, unguarded brightness in her face. There were also several sketches, charcoal drawings of windows, hands, trees, and one unfinished image of a door opening into a room filled with light. Claire sat back on her heels and felt a sensation she could not name. It was not fear. It was not excitement. It was more like being remembered by something she had forgotten to remember. Her mother, standing near the shelves, glanced over and said softly that Claire used to draw for hours after school, sometimes until dinner went cold. She said it without accusation, just as a fact from another life. But the words entered Claire with unexpected force. She had not chosen technology because she hated art. She had chosen it because it seemed safer, easier to explain, more stable, more acceptable to a family that had known enough uncertainty. And now this second key lay in her hand beside the evidence of the girl she had once been. This was the moment the coincidence became a mirror, not a command, not a supernatural instruction to abandon everything. A mirror. The first key had touched the feeling that something was locked. The second key showed her what had been placed behind the door. In Jungian language, the unconscious had taken an ordinary object and repeated it until the ego could no longer dismiss the image as meaningless. The sign was not outside her asking to be worshipped. It was inside her asking to be understood. What happened in that garage did not give Claire a map. It gave her a mirror. And this distinction matters more than most people realize, because the moment a sign touches something deep, the ego often wants to turn it into certainty. It wants to say, this must mean I should quit my job, move to another city, call someone from the past, change everything by next month, and prove that I understood the message. But synchronicity does not usually work that way. It is not a set of instructions handed down from the sky. It is a meeting point between the outer world and the inner life. It shows you where meaning has gathered. It does not remove the need for patience, honesty, discernment, and time. For Claire, the silver key was not telling her to abandon her career in technology or run toward a completely different identity overnight. It was showing her the emotional shape of something she had locked away. The key reflected the part of her that had once felt alive. Through color, paper, texture, imagination, and quiet hours of making something no one had asked her to justify. It reflected the 17-year-old girl in the photograph who did not yet know how often adult life would ask her to choose what was explainable over what was true. This is where Jung becomes precise. A symbol becomes powerful because we do not see it only as it is. We see it through the inner material we carry. We project longing onto it. We project fear onto it. We project unlived life, grief, desire, memory, and the questions we have not dared to ask. A key is metal, but in Claire's psyche, it became a doorway, a reminder, a small silver witness to the part of her that had been waiting without making noise. This does not make the sign false. It makes it personal. The danger is not in noticing signs. The danger is in refusing to ask what part of you is participating in the meaning. If you treat every sign like a command, you may begin to chase symbols instead of understanding yourself. You may look outside for permission instead of listening inwardly for truth. But if you treat the sign like a mirror, something changes. You stop asking, what is this object trying to force me to do? You begin asking, what did this awaken in me? What emotion moved when I saw it again? What memory returned? What part of my life suddenly felt too small, too silent, too far from the person I once hoped to become? Sitting on the garage floor with the old sketches in her lap, Claire did not receive a dramatic answer. She received a question that felt more honest than any answer she could have invented. Why did I leave this part of myself behind? The question did not blame her. It did not call her a failure. It simply opened a space where truth could breathe. And for the first time in years, Claire understood that the sign was not asking to be worshipped. It was asking her to look at the life inside the symbol, the life she had mistaken for a childhood phase, when it may have been one of the clearest languages of her soul. The part Claire had left behind was not childish, impractical, or unworthy of her adult life. It was simply the part that had not known how to survive inside the rules she believed she had to follow. As she sat in her mother's garage with the old sketches spread across her knees, she began to see that her shadow was not something frightening waiting in the dark. It was the living color she had pushed out of sight so she could become reasonable, stable, impressive, and easy to explain. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is often misunderstood as only the negative side of a person, but very often it also contains vitality, creativity, instinct, sensitivity, and desire that had no safe place in the conscious identity. For Claire, the shadow was not a hidden cruelty. It was the girl who could lose 3 hours drawing a doorway and feel more awake than she did after an entire week of meetings. It was the part of her that wanted work to touch the human soul, not only user behavior and product goals. It was the part that missed color, silence, hands stained with charcoal, and the strange peace of making something without needing to defend its usefulness. That part had been placed behind an inner door because life had taught her that safety mattered more than aliveness. Her parents had never meant to wound her. They had wanted her to have health insurance, steady income, rent paid on time, and a future that did not depend on luck. In a country where stability can feel fragile and expensive, that kind of advice can sound like love, and often it is love. But love filtered through fear can still teach a person to distrust the deepest movement of the soul. So Claire became good at choosing what made sense. She chose the major that led to a stable job. She chose the job that sounded responsible at family dinners. She chose the apartment, the savings plan, the clean resume, the life that looked calm from the outside. And slowly, without any single dramatic moment, the artist in her became quiet enough to be mistaken for gone. This is how the shadow forms. Not always through one large wound, but through repeated small agreements to abandon what is true so life will feel safer. You say no to one instinct, then another, then another. You call it maturity. You call it practicality. You call it being realistic. And perhaps some of it is necessary. But after years of this, the soul begins to ask for what was lost. It may ask through restlessness. It may ask through dreams. It may ask through a repeated sign that seems too ordinary to matter and too personal to forget. Claire held one of the charcoal drawings up to the garage light. It was unfinished, a doorway opening into a bright room, the lines uneven but alive. Looking at it, she felt grief, but not the kind that pulls a person backward. It was the kind of grief that reveals value. She had not lost a hobby. She had lost a language. And now, through the image of the key, the unconscious was not demanding that she become 17 again. It was asking whether the woman she had become could finally make room for the part of herself she had left waiting there. By the time Claire drove back to Seattle that evening, the sky had turned the color of wet slate, and the city lights were beginning to appear through the windshield like small signals in the rain. The envelope with the sketches was on the passenger seat, and the silver key rested inside it, wrapped in an old photograph from high school. For the first 20 minutes of the drive, she felt strangely open, almost tender, as if some sealed part of her had been touched with unexpected kindness. But then the ego began to speak. It did not sound cruel. It sounded reasonable. It said, "Do not make this into something bigger than it is." It said, "People find old things in boxes all the time." It said, "You are tired, sentimental, maybe a little overwhelmed." It said, "You have a good job, a good life, a stable routine, and there is no need to disturb everything because of 2 keys and a few drawings from when you were younger." This is how the ego often protects the old structure. It does not always attack transformation directly. Sometimes it simply explains it away until the soul goes quiet again. It calls the sign coincidence. It calls longing impractical. It calls grief unnecessary. It calls the return of aliveness a distraction. And because the ego has helped you survive for so long, its voice can feel like wisdom, even when it is only fear wearing a calm face. Claire understood this without fully naming it. On Monday morning, she returned to work with the sketches hidden in a drawer at home. She opened her laptop, joined a product meeting, reviewed user feedback, and gave a clear summary of what customers were struggling to understand. Everything moved as usual. The team appreciated her. The slides were clean. The work was useful. But beneath the rhythm of the day, the image of the key kept returning. Not loudly, not obsessively, just gently, at odd moments. When she clicked through a spreadsheet. When she waited for coffee in the office kitchen. When someone described a feature as locked behind too many steps. That phrase made her look up. Locked behind too many steps. It was ordinary language, but it landed in her body with the weight of recognition. She almost laughed at herself, then quickly looked back at the screen. This is the stage where many people turn away because they are afraid that listening inwardly will make them irresponsible. But listening is not the same as losing control. Depth is not the opposite of discipline. The unconscious does not ask you to abandon reason. It asks you to stop using reason as a wall against truth. Claire did not need to prove the keys meant something in a way that would convince everyone around her. She only needed to admit that they had awakened something she could no longer honestly deny. That night, in her apartment, she took the sketches out again and placed them on her kitchen table. Rain tapped softly against the window. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. She looked at the drawing of the open doorway and felt the old defensive voice rise again. It is too late. You are too busy. This was another life. But beneath that voice was another one, much quieter, not arguing, not forcing, not begging. It simply asked, what if you do not have to change everything? What if you only have to stop pretending this part of you is gone? Claire did not quit her job the next morning. She did not announce a new identity, throw away her routine, or turn the silver key into a dramatic reason to make her life unrecognizable. That would have been the ego again, only wearing the costume of awakening. Instead, she chose something smaller, quieter, and more faithful. She cleared the kitchen table, placed the old sketches beside a blank sheet of paper, and sharpened a pencil she had found in a drawer full of receipts, batteries, and forgotten pens. The first line she drew felt awkward. Her hand did not move with the confidence she remembered from 17. The shape came out uneven. The proportions were wrong. A part of her wanted to laugh, close the sketchbook, and say, see, this is why we stopped. But another part of her stayed. She kept drawing for 10 minutes, then 20, not because the drawing was good, but because something in her was breathing differently while she made it. This is how integration often begins. Not as a grand life change, but as a small act that gives the buried part of the self a place to exist in the present tense. The unconscious does not need you to destroy your ordinary life in order to honor what it shows you. Sometimes it only asks you to make one honest opening. One page, 1 hour, one conversation, one class, one refusal to keep calling your aliveness impractical. The following week, Claire searched for local art studios near her apartment and found a Wednesday evening drawing class in Capitol Hill. She stared at the registration page for almost 15 minutes. The price was reasonable. The location was only a short drive away. The schedule did not interfere with work. Still, her mind searched for reasons to postpone it. You are busy. You will feel out of place. Everyone else will be better. This will not lead anywhere. But then she looked at the silver key on her desk, not as an object with magical power, but as a reminder of the question she had been avoiding. What door stays locked when I keep waiting to feel ready? She registered before she could make fear sound wise again. On the first Wednesday night, rain fell over Seattle in thin silver lines as she walked into the studio with a new sketchbook under her arm. The room smelled faintly of paper, graphite, and coffee. There were folding chairs, wooden easels, soft lamps, and people of different ages quietly arranging their materials. No one asked her to justify why she was there. No one needed her to be impressive. No one expected a presentation, a strategy, or a polished answer. For 2 hours, Claire drew simple objects on a table, a ceramic mug, a folded cloth, a pear under warm light. Nothing extraordinary happened, and yet everything important began there. She was not becoming someone else. She was making room for the person she had been before fear taught her to become only useful. On Sunday morning, she gave herself 30 minutes by the apartment window to sketch while the city woke beneath gray clouds. She told one trusted friend that she missed making art, and the words felt strange but clean in her mouth. Slowly, the sign began to soften, not because it had lost meaning, but because the meaning had been heard. The key had knocked. Claire had opened a small door, and through that small door, the soul began to return without needing to tear the whole house down. Months later, Claire walked through Pike Place Market again on a Saturday morning, not because she was searching for anything, but because the city had begun to feel different when she moved through it with less of herself hidden. The sky over Seattle was pale and cloudy, the kind of soft gray that made flower stalls look brighter and coffee shop windows feel warmer. Vendors were calling out prices, tourists were taking pictures, and somewhere near the entrance a musician played a quiet song that seemed to fold itself into the rain. Claire passed the same stone ledge where she had once found the first silver key, and for a moment she slowed down. Nothing was there. No key, no strange object catching the light, no repeated sign waiting to confirm that she had understood correctly. And instead of disappointment, she felt relief. The sign no longer needed to appear because the part of her it had pointed toward was no longer locked away in silence. This is the deeper ending of synchronicity. It does not come so you can become dependent on signs. It comes to bring your attention back to something in you that has been exiled from your conscious life. Once that part begins to return, the sign may soften, fade, or become ordinary again, not because it was meaningless, but because its first work has been completed. Claire stood near the market with a paper cup of coffee in her hands and thought about how much had changed without her outer life becoming unrecognizable. She still worked in technology. She still lived in her apartment. She still opened spreadsheets, joined meetings, asked users careful questions, and translated human behavior into patterns her team could understand. But something beneath the surface had shifted. Her work no longer had to contain all of her identity. Her practical life no longer had to prove that her inner life was unnecessary. On Wednesday nights, she went to drawing class. On Sunday mornings, she sketched by the window for 30 minutes, sometimes more. She had begun keeping a small notebook in her bag, and during lunch breaks she would draw cups, hands, buildings, faces, or the curve of rain sliding down glass. None of it was dramatic. None of it could be turned into a perfect success story, but it was alive, and that was what she had been missing. One evening after class, her instructor paused near her easel and said her drawings carried a quiet attention, as if she was not only looking at objects but listening to them. Years earlier, Claire might have turned that compliment into pressure. She would have wondered whether she needed to become great, whether this meant she had wasted time, whether she should turn art into a new life plan quickly enough to make the past feel justified. But this time, she simply received the words and let them rest inside her. She did not need to force the symbol into a performance. She did not need to make the key prove anything. The door had opened enough for her to enter slowly. In Jungian language, this is part of individuation, the movement toward becoming more whole. Not more perfect, not more impressive, not more easily understood by everyone around you, but more internally honest. A person becomes whole when the abandoned parts of the psyche begin to find their rightful place in the life being lived now. The shadow does not have to overthrow the ego. The ego does not have to erase the shadow. The practical self and the creative self, the responsible adult and the sensitive inner child, the part that knows how to survive and the part that knows how to feel wonder, all begin to sit at the same table. This is what Claire slowly learned. She had not been asked to return to 17. She had been asked to stop living as though 17 had nothing left to offer her. She had not been asked to reject safety. She had been asked to stop confusing safety with self-abandonment. She had not been asked to worship coincidence. She had been asked to understand why one ordinary symbol had touched her with such force. And perhaps this is how God, the universe, or the deeper self often speaks. Not always through a voice that tells you exactly what will happen next, but through a moment that returns you to a truth you have been circling for years. A sign may come as a key, a dream, a phrase, a song, a person, or a place that suddenly feels full of meaning. But the real question is never only, what does this mean out there? The real question is, what does this awaken in here? When Claire reached the end of the market, the rain had stopped. A thin opening of light appeared between the clouds, soft enough that most people would not notice it unless they were looking up. She turned toward the water and felt the envelope of old sketches in her bag, not as proof that the past had been restored, but as evidence that nothing true is ever completely lost when the soul is finally willing to listen. The silver key had appeared twice, but it had not come to tell her the future. It had come to return her to the part of herself that already knew where the door was.